Chapter 2. Congratulations, Your Highness the Crown Prince. Hearing this, Xiao Lian raised his head and smiled before saying, "Thank you. However, can I ask what you are congratulating me for?" Lingwen Zhenjuan stood with her hands behind her back and said, "Congratulations on obtaining first place on the list of heavenly officials who most wish to be banished to the mortal world." Xiao Lian said, "No matter what, it's still first place. But I think that since you are congratulating me, then there should be something to be happy about." Lingwen said, "There is. First place on this list can obtain 100 merits." Xia Lian immediately said, "Next time, if there is such a list, please be sure to include me." Lingwen said, "Do you know who is second?" Xiao Lian thought for a moment and said, "It's too hard to guess. After all, in terms of strength, I alone should be able to take the top 3 places." Lingwen said, "It's about time. There is no second place. You are so far ahead that it is impossible to catch up." Xiao Lian said, "I really don't dare." "Then who was first place in the last 60 years?" Lingwen said, "No one. Because this list only started this year. To be precise, it only started today." Huh? Xiao Lian stared blankly and said, "So you're saying that this isn't a list specially set up for me, right?" Lingwen said, "You can also think that because you just happened to be there, you just happened to get first place." Xiao Lian beamed and said, "Okay, if I think like that, I will be a bit happier." Lingwen continued, "Do you know why you got first place?" Xiao Lian said, "Because everyone wants it." Lingwen said, "Let me tell you the reason. Look at that clock." She raised her hand and pointed. Xiao Lian turned around and looked. What he saw was extremely beautiful. He saw a white jade temple, pavilions, terraces, and pagodas, celestial clouds curling around, and flowing springs and flying birds, but after looking for a long time, he asked, "Did you point in the wrong direction? Where is the clock?" Lingwen said, "You didn't point in the wrong direction. It's right there. Do you see it?" Xiao Lian looked again seriously and said truthfully, "I don't see it." Lingwen said, "That's right. Originally, there was a clock there, but when you ascended, it was shaken off. That bell is older than you, but it has a lively personality. Whenever someone ascends, it will ring a few times to cheer them on. On the day of your ascension, it shook the bell until it went crazy and couldn't stop. In the end, it fell down from the bell tower and stopped. It fell and hit a passing priestess." Xiao Lian said, Then is it better now?" Lingwen replied, "No, I'm still working on it." Xiao Lian said, "I'm talking about the priest who was hit." Lingwen said, "The one who smashed it was a martial god. He immediately turned his hand and split it in 2. Again. Please look at the golden palace over there. Do you see that?" She pointed again, and Xiao Lian looked again. He saw a dazzling golden dome in the midst of the clouds, and said, "Ah, I see it this time." Lingwen said, "It would be wrong if you saw it. There was nothing there. When you ascended, the golden pillars and glazed tiles of many heavenly officials' palaces were toppled. Some of them couldn't be repaired in a short time, so they had no choice but to build a few new ones. The responsibility is on me. The responsibility is on you." "Oh." Xiao Lian confirmed, "Did I offend many heavenly officials when I just ascended?" Lingwen said, "If you can salvage it, then perhaps not. Then what can I do to salvage it? It's easy to say. 8,880,000 merits." Xiao Lian smiled again. Lingwen said, "Of course, I know you can't even take out 1/10 of it." Xiao Lian frankly said, "How do I say this? Although it's very embarrassing, even if you want 1/10,000th of it, I can't take it out." The faith of the mortal world's believers transformed into the heavenly officials' magical power, and their incense and offerings were called merits. After he finished laughing, Xiao Lian solemnly asked, "Are you willing to kick me down from here right now and give me 8,880,000 merits?" Lingwen said, I'm a literary god. If you want someone to kick you, you should find a martial god. The harder you kick, the more you give. After a long sigh, Xiaolian said, let me think about what to do. Lingwen patted his shoulder and said, don't panic. When the car reaches the mountain, there will be a way. Xiaolian said, I am. When the boat reaches the bridgehead, it will naturally sink. If it was 800 years ago when Xianlu Palace was at its peak, how difficult would it be to get? 8,880,000 merits? His Highness the Crown Prince wouldn't even bat an eyelid. But today was different from the past. His temples in the mortal world had long been burned to the point that not a single one remained. There were no believers, no incense, no offerings, there was no need to say anything. In any case, there was nothing at all. Xiaolian squatted alone on the streets of a mortal city and had a headache for a long time. Only then did he suddenly remember that it had been almost 3 days since he ascended, but he still hadn't entered the Heavenly Court's spirit communication array. Just now, he had forgotten to ask for the password. The heavenly officials in the Heavenly Court had jointly set up a set of array that could allow one's divine sense to instantly communicate with the spirit within the array. After ascending, one had to enter the array. However, one needed to know the password in order to use their divine sense to search for the specific spirit communication array. The last time Xiaolian entered the array was already 800 years ago, so he simply couldn't remember what the password was. He released his divine sense to search, and when he saw that one of the arrays seemed a bit similar, he randomly entered. The moment he entered the array, he was swept to the left and right by the frenzied shouts that surged from all directions. Let's place our bets. Once we're done, let's bet on how long our crown prince can hold on before going down again. I'll bet 1 year. 1 year is too long. Last time, it was only a stick of incense. This time, it'll be 3 days. I'll bet 3 days, 3 days. Don't, you idiot. 3 days have almost passed. Can you do it? Xiaolian silently withdrew. Wrong, it definitely wasn't this. Those who entered the Heavenly Court were all great heavenly officials who oversaw a region. Each and every one of them was well known and had a myriad of affairs to attend to. Moreover, because they were all proper heavenly officials who had ascended to the heavens, they were usually more reserved and reserved. Their words and actions often carried a certain air. It was only when he had ascended for the first time that he had grabbed and greeted every heavenly official in the spirit communication array because he had been too excited. He had introduced himself from head to toe with incomparable seriousness and detail. After he withdrew, he randomly searched again and randomly entered another array. This time, when he entered, Xiaolian's heart relaxed. He thought to himself, it's so quiet, it's most likely this one. At this time, he heard a soft voice say, has His Highness the Crown Prince returned? This voice sounded very comfortable at first. The voice was soft and gentle, and the tone was refined. However, if one listened carefully, they would discover that the voice was very cold, and the mood was also very cold. It actually made that gentleness somewhat seem like it harbored ill intentions. Xiaolian originally only wanted to enter the array according to the rules and silently lurk. However, since the other party had already found him to talk, he couldn't just pretend to be deaf and mute. Moreover, there was actually a heavenly official in the Heavenly Court who was willing to take the initiative to talk to him, the God of Plagues, so he was very happy. Thus, he quickly replied, that's right. Hello everyone, I've returned. How? Could he have known that after this question and answer, all the heavenly officials in the spirit communication array at this moment all pricked up their ears? That heavenly official leisurely said, His Highness the Crown Prince's ascension this time is truly a great spectacle. In the Heavenly Court, it could be said that emperors and generals walked everywhere, and heroes were like flowing water. In order to become an immortal, one must first become an outstanding person. In the mortal world, those who had made meritorious achievements or great talents had originally had a greater chance of ascension. Therefore, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say that kings, princesses, princes, and generals weren't rare in this place. Who wasn't a proud son of heaven? Everyone was polite and courteous to each other. They would randomly address each other as Your Majesty, Your Highness, General, Sect Leader, Alliance Leader, and Alliance Leader. However, this heavenly official's 2 sentences didn't sound so right. Although he kept saying His Highness the Crown Prince left and right, it didn't make people feel that he had the slightest bit of respect. Instead, it was like he was using a needle to poke people. There were a few other heavenly officials in the spirit communication array who were also genuine crown princes, but after hearing him call them that, they felt goosebumps on their backs and their whole body felt uncomfortable. Xiao Lian could already tell that the heavenly official didn't come with good intentions, but he didn't want to fight over who was better. He thought to himself that he would run away, so he smiled and said, "It's all right." However, that heavenly official didn't give him a chance to run away, and said indifferently, "Your Highness the Crown Prince, it's all right. However, my luck is rather bad." Suddenly, Xiao Lian heard a secret message from Lang Wen's side. She only said one word, "Zhong." Xiao Lian instantly understood so this was the martial god who was hit by Zhong. Since that was the case, it wasn't unreasonable for him to be angry. Xiao Lian had always been very good at apologizing, so he immediately said, "I've heard about Zhong, I'm very sorry, I'm sorry." The heavenly official snorted, but couldn't tell what he meant. There were many famous martial gods in the heavenly realm, and many of them were new nobles who had ascended after Xiao Lian. Just by listening to his voice, Xiao Lian couldn't tell who this was, but he couldn't apologize without knowing his name. Thus, he asked again, "May I ask how to address Your Excellency?" Once these words came out, the heavenly official became silent. Not only did the heavenly official become silent, but the entire spirit communication array seemed to have solidified, and a deathly aura assaulted his senses. On the other side, Ling When transmitted to him again, "Your Highness, although I feel that you shouldn't not recognize him after talking for so long, I still want to remind you. That's Xianzhen." Xiao Lian said, "Xianzhen?" He froze for a moment before finally reacting. Slightly shocked, he transmitted back, "That's Mu Qing?" General Xianzhen was the martial god who oversaw the southwest. He sat on 7,000 temples and could be said to be illustrious in the human world, and this General Xianzhen's real name was Mu Qing. 800 years ago, he was a deputy general who served under the Crown Prince of Xian Le Palace. Ling Wen was also very shocked. "You can't really not recognize him, right?" Xiao Lian said, "I really can't recognize him. In the past, he didn't talk to me like this. Moreover, when was the last time I met him? I can't remember clearly. If it wasn't 500 years ago, then it was 600 years ago. I can't even remember what he looks like, so how could I recognize his voice?" The spirit communication array remained silent. Mu Qing didn't utter a single word. And the other heavenly officials pretended that they weren't listening while crazily waiting for someone to hurry up and continue the conversation. Speaking of which, the two of them were in an awkward situation. The twists and turns of the story had been passed down for so many years, so everyone already knew about most of it. Back then, Xiao Lian was the crown prince of Xianlu and cultivated in the Huangji Temple. This Huangji Temple was Xianlu country's imperial family's Taoist temple, and its standards for selecting disciples were very strict. Mu Qing was born poor, and his father was a criminal who had been beheaded. This kind of person didn't have the qualifications to enter the Huangji Temple, so he could only be an odd job worker. In the temple, he cleaned the rooms for the crown prince and served tea and water. Xiao Lian saw that he was hardworking and diligent, so he asked the state preceptor to make an exception and accept him as a disciple. The crown prince's words were like gold and jade, so Mu Qing was able to enter the temple and cultivate together with the crown prince. And after he ascended, Xiao Lian also appointed him as a general and brought him with him to a mortal capital. However, after Xianlu was destroyed and Xiao Lian was banished to the mortal world, Mu Qing didn't follow him. Not only did he not follow him, he didn't even say a single word for him. In any case, the crown prince was no more, so he was free. He found a paradise and diligently cultivated. Within a few years, he passed through the heavenly tribulation and ascended on his OWN.AT. That time, one was in the heavens and one was on the earth. Now, one was in the heavens and one was on the earth. It was just that the two people's circumstances were completely reversed. On the other side, Ling Wen said, he's very angry. Xiao Lian said, I guessed so too. Ling Wen said, I'll go say something else. You should quickly take the opportunity to leave. Xiao Lian said, no need. Wouldn't it be fine to just pretend that nothing happened? Ling Wen said, no need. I feel awkward just looking at you guys. Xiao Lian said, it's okay. Xiao Lian was a person who could do anything but die. He didn't do anything, but he definitely lost a lot of face. He had done things that were many times more embarrassing than this, so in his heart, he really felt that it was okay. Who knew that all things couldn't be said to be okay, first? Just as he said it's okay, he heard a roar, who the fuck tore down my golden palace? Get the hell out here. This roar made all the immortals in the array feel like their scalps were going to explode. Although their stomachs were already tumbling, they still held their breaths and waited silently to hear how Xiao Lian was going to reply to this cursing. Who would have thought that there was no most exciting thing, only more exciting? Before Xiao Lian could open his mouth, Mu Qing spoke first. He laughed twice. The person who came coldly said, you tore it down? Fine, wait. Mu Qing indifferently said, I didn't say it was me. Don't make false accusations. The other person said, then why are you laughing? Are you crazy? Mu Qing said, nothing else. What you said was funny, that's all. The person who tore down your golden palace is currently in the array. You can ask him yourself. Things had already reached this point. No matter what, Xiao Lian was too embarrassed to run away like this. He coughed dryly and said, it was me. I'm sorry. Once he spoke, the person who came later also fell silent. By his ear, Ling Wen transmitted her voice again. Your Highness, that's Nan Yang. Xiao Lian said, I recognize this one. But he doesn't seem to recognize me. Ling Wen said, no. He just roams around the mortal world more and returns to a mortal capital less. He doesn't know that you've ascended. Nanyang Zhenjun was the martial god who oversaw the southeast. He sat on nearly 8,000 temples and was extremely loved by the common people. His real name was Feng Xian. 800 years ago, he was the #1 divine general under His Highness the Crown Prince of Xian Le Palace.